Are you the type of person that struggles a bit with the humidity in your environment, pests, and generally you'd like to kind of level up your houseplant game? Today I'm going to touch on the topic of IKEA glass cabinets, terrariums-ish, and indoor greenhouses. And before you all disappear, I'm doing a pros and cons because it turns out that there's a lot of debate on this subject. So stick around with me and let's dive into it. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So apologies for the slight, sleevelessness of it all today, but it is painfully hot in the conservatory at the moment. The sun has just gone behind the clouds, so I'm enjoying the tiny bit of coolness that brings, but I am sweltering in here. You don't even want to know how hot it is at the moment. But as I said at the beginning of the video, this is a topic that actually came up on one of my recent videos' comment section, and I didn't realize it was this much of a contentious subject. And because I like to poke the bear a few times, let's talk about this, because I'll say it from the word go, I do not have an IKEA glass cabinet, I don't have a terrarium. Currently I've got a vivarium where kind of the crested gecko spike is living in, but that's not quite the same thing. And I don't have an indoor greenhouse because my conservatory pretty much ticks all those boxes. It's more or less the same thing as most of those things. However, I do know an awful lot of people that have got IKEA glass cabinets and they've turned them into essentially what is a make-do kind of greenhouse slash terrarium thing. And along the same lines, I'll touch a bit on kind of grow tents and kind of doing proper terrariums as well, and hopefully be able to give the pros and cons as I see them, basically. But this is a video that is predominantly done for you, the community, because as I said, there's a lot of people that are for and a lot of people that are against. And I'm hoping we need respectful comments down below, but I'm assuming this might be a video that you're all going to have a say about. So, and I encourage that because I think if we've got situations like this that need airing, let's air them out. So yeah, without further ado, let's dive into it. And I've got more or less, I think, 5 pros and 5 cons. I am sure there are more, and I'm sure you're all going to tell me down below. But yes, let's dive into the pros first. So first pro that I want to touch on in terms of for having an IKEA glass cabinet, a terrarium type setup, and or a grow tent is humidity. It's the obvious one, and it's, I think, the reason why a lot of people will gravitate towards doing something like that. It is a very controlled environment for humidity, because a lot of people don't have the luxury of what I have, and I do appreciate that I am very blessed and fortunate to have something like a conservatory. It comes with its own set of problems. I will link up a video at the top just so you've got an understanding as to the issues that I face as well in this space. But yeah, humidity is a big thing. This is, I think, the main reason why people would use IKEA glass cabinets. And I do know a lot of people, kind of individuals within the plant community. I know some of the other YouTubers that you all know and love, and the same with some of the Instagram plant influencers. A lot of them have got glass cabinets. The reality is, as I said, I don't have a need for it because I've got a space that does that already. Would I at least try to attempt to try something like that? How many times did I use the word try there? Possibly. I'm still one of those people that's very undecided on the subject. But yes, humidity is a big thing because if you think about it, essentially any of these things, the indoor greenhouse, a terrarium obviously, a grow tent, an IKEA glass cabinet, you are controlling the humidity to the nth degree. It's essentially, it works the same way roughly as a closed terrarium, and we all know that the humidity levels in those tend to be exceptionally high. And this is a big draw for people because a lot of the times if you've got a house that is very dry, or you've got central heating on which dries out your air a lot more, a lot of these plants, not all of them, that we all love and want to enjoy tend to do a lot better in an environment where it's high humidity. I will harken back to the notion that a lot of us who have done kind of the prop boxes, it's a similar thing in a much smaller scale, and that is kind of why we do it. It's the higher levels of humidity within those spaces. The next big pro is temperature, or more specifically, temperature control. Now, swings and roundabouts a bit with this one, because what I mean by that is more so for times like the winter. There's a con that comes with this in the summer, basically, but more so for times like in the winter, where if you've got specific plants that are very sensitive to things like cold drafts, things like that, they will appreciate that more stable temperature environment. And a lot of people will use, and let me bring it up and show you, something like this, a hydrometer, thermometer, all of these things in their glass cabinets to make sure that the humidity that we were talking about a moment ago stays at a reasonable level and the temperature stays stable. And this does make sense, because if you think about it, when it's got any of those things, I'm not going to list them every time, so terrarium, a glass cabinet, and grow tent as well. Grow tent is the one that I don't know, tell me if you've got a grow tent and this is a thing that's a benefit. It doesn't get the drafts, basically. So if you're in the winter and you've got a lot of windows and doors opening out to the cold, you might get cold blasts of air that might kind of cause issues to some of the more sensitive tropical plants. With something that's enclosed, obviously you avoid that. Does it also potentially cause a little microclimate in there? Yes, I would imagine. Again, correct me if you've had different experiences, but one of the things that I tend to do in the winter in my unheated greenhouse in my garden, if I want to get things started a bit earlier, and this is a trick that I saw from another YouTuber, I can't remember who it was at this particular moment in time, but I will have my greenhouse, which is unheated, bubble wrapped, and for the people in the UK that know, you know why you do that, just to get a bit more insulation in and keep some of that heat in that doesn't exist so much in the winter, but in. And then I will use something like a prop box within that space to do that, because that gives me an extra bit of temperature control and a bit more stability there. So I would imagine it's the same thing with glass cabinets and everything like that. Your house might be a relatively warm environment, but there might be some fluctuations. Something like that much of a controlled environment, I would imagine, would control the temperature even more so. Third big pro is pest management. And again, you'll see this a bit later on as well. But in theory, the concept stands true that if you've got a pest situation in that much of a small environment and it's controlled, you would imagine that dealing with those pests is a lot easier, because you've only got to treat that environment, that glass cabinet, that terrarium, that grow tent, because it's all enclosed within that space. And it means that if you want to use something like predatory insects, things like that, especially predatory insects actually a lot of the time, because I'll give you an example. When you're thinking about something like mealybugs, main predators in their adult form, these are the mealybug predators that look like mealybugs themselves, and hopefully I've got some videos, maybe I can add them here so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. They are, when they grow up, basically, the predators, when they're kind of more mature, and you want to kind of control them a bit more, because hopefully the mature ones will procreate and create more little like pest-munching predators, they turn into something that looks essentially like a ladybug. It's very similar in shape and kind of in morphology, and they fly. So actually being able to control it in an environment like that means that you're keeping your pest management within that space as well. It also then means that you've got more control, again, because it's that controlled environment. And I've just realized I lost count. Ovs. Consider the humidity and the temperature was a one pro, because essentially it's all under the controlled environment. I've got a list, but obviously I'm going off book at this particular time, but it's the controlled environment of it all. So considering that was number one, number two is pest management, number three is this one, it's kind of aesthetic appeal. And by that, what do I mean? It's essentially giving you, it is what it is, essentially like an IKEA glass cabinet, and this works for the IKEA glass cabinet, an indoor Greenhouse, possibly, but those cheapy ones with the plastic kind of covering them, probably not so much. And a terrarium definitely applies to terrarium and glass cabinet. They essentially frame your plants into something that is technically quite visually pleasing. You can create your own jungle. And I have seen people do different things to their IKEA glass cabinets, which I'm pretty sure, just to give you an idea, I live nowhere near an IKEA anymore. I need to like travel 2 or 3 hours by car to get to my closest IKEA. So I don't go to it that often. But from what I've seen, I'm pretty sure that what IKEA was selling these glass cabinets as is a display cabinet. So makes sense that you could display your plants in a display cabinet. Well, I don't know, maybe it's just me. Oh, but so with something like that, you can display it and people can see it. You can kind of set it up in any way that you want. And I've seen different people, as I was saying, that have set them up in different ways. One, they kind of leave the shelves and they've just got the plants in and it's very utilitarian. Other people that pretty much do a lot of customization in it to make it look like a massive terrarium, and they'll do, I think, spray foam and create kind of backdrops and all of these things. So you can make it your own essentially, and I'm assuming that is a big draw for people actually. It also then means that because it's aesthetically pleasing and it's got that controlled environment, you could have a lot of very finicky plants that normally would not survive in regular household conditions in your living room, because that bit is controlled, and the living room might be dry as a Sahara desert, but that is still controlled in there so they can survive and thrive, and you can see them a bit more frequently. The fourth big thing is, I would imagine, space efficiency. So, and I think a lot of, I might not be entirely right by this, but I'm pretty sure most of the people that I see that have this tend to be city dwellers that tend to be maybe in smaller flats. They don't have an awful lot of space to basically, and don't get me wrong, I'm pretty sure that most of their houses still look like an indoor jungle, don't get me wrong, but it kind of gives them, it's the same thing as if you've got a shelving unit with plants, which is what I've got essentially. It's utilizing that vertical space and being able to put many, many plants within that space to kind of grow them. And the fifth big thing, and I think this might be the biggest one that might be contentious in the comments down below, is customizability. So what do I mean by that? So with an IKEA glass cabinet, as I mentioned, people can make it their own. You can get humidity meters, like I was showing you before. You can get grow lights in it. You can get fans going in it. So you can make it your own based on the needs of the specific plants that you've got for it. So I know a lot of people will just put all of their rare plants in there because they want to baby them, that's fine. Other people might just put all of their begonias in because they want to have a controlled environment for begonias, and some begonias do really well in terrariums, thus they will do quite well in something like an IKEA glass cabinet. Apologies if the light is blinding, but it's, the sun is coming back, which is a good thing, don't get me wrong. I was whinging that we didn't have a summer, but it's also blinding. Like, this is quite early in the morning and it's on a weekday. I was going to film on my usual Saturday or Sunday, but by about 8 a.m. this space in here was between 35 and 40 degrees Celsius. So super hot, super hot. It's a bit cooler today, but still. But yes, customizability is a thing because you can make it your own. As I said, you can do all of these things. You can control certain things, not control certain things, have multiple different types of plants, one specific type of plants. I've also seen people use the IKEA glass cabinets almost like a massive prop box. So instead of having a prop box, which arguably is ugly, it's not the most exciting thing in the world. And don't get me wrong, I also understand, and we'll touch on the grow tents of it all, but yes, it can be a bit more visually pleasing, and you can kind of do a lot of customization to it. Shall we dive into the cons? Because again, I know a lot of people had very strong views, both, as I said, for and against. But yeah, let's dive into the first con, ventilation issues. So closed environment, great for controlling everything, but ventilation is a thing. Like, can you see all the leaves that might be moving around me? You might have even been catching some of the air blowing on the microphone. Again, I need it because otherwise I'm going to melt in here. I've got a fan going. There's constantly fans going around here. People, before anybody says, I do know that a lot of people, when they maybe first get their IKEA glass cabinet and maybe they haven't read or watched many videos or articles online saying about kind of things that they can do to supersize it, might just go, I don't need a fan, I don't need air circulation in there, and then they come up with ventilation issues. Because if it's a closed environment, you're not getting any air movement, you're potentially going to get some bacterial or fungal issues within that space, and because it's all there, and a lot of these things can be airborne as well at times, there's issues. So one of the ways that people I've seen get around this is by utilizing something like a fan in that space, making sure maybe that they open up the whole enclosure quite frequently. Question that I have there is if you're opening it up quite frequently, I would imagine the humidity level will drop quite quickly at that point. How does it first? Does it drop a lot and does it drop quickly? And how quickly does it go back up again after you've closed everything to kind of help air it out? I'm very curious. Just let me know in the comments down below. But yes, ventilation is probably one of the biggest issues with something like this. Same thing would go for the grow tents, the indoor greenhouses. Oh my God, I lost so many plants by using an indoor greenhouse because I didn't think about it, zipped it all in, went away on holiday, basically cooked my plants. And came back after a whole, this was many, many years ago when I didn't know what I was really doing. They turned into soup, and they turned into moldy soup as well. That was great. But yes, so ventilation can be an issue. The other big potential con that I can see with this is something like overheating. So you can kind of see a lot of these pros and cons. The benefit can also lead to negatives, as with most things in life, really. Come on, I'm not the only one that knows this. But yes, like it can cause overheating because imagine this, you've got a glass cabinet and it's right by a window because you don't want to use a grow light. That's fine. What that will mean though on hot sunny days, especially if they're getting direct light and you maybe don't realize it, it will cook everything. Everything will overheat in there. A lot of the times, even if you don't have it close to a window, but you want to have grow lights in there, a lot of the grow lights that you can get these days have got, especially the LED grow lights, and I think not just the LED grow lights, I'm trying to think if the tube lighting, I can't remember what it's called now, that people used to use before the LEDs, and they still use them. I think they're still quite good from what I'm hearing. I don't think they emit a lot of heat. I might be wrong, but also I don't know if you can get them small enough to put in an IKEA glass cabinet. I am sure people will tell me that I'm wrong with this, and as I'm saying this, I think I've seen people do this. But a lot of these lights generate heat. And they've usually got fans, they've got like heat sinks and all these things to dissipate it. But if you're in a closed environment, that heat doesn't have anywhere to go. So you might be causing heat stress to some of these plants. You might also be diminishing the lifespan of some of these grow lights because they're not having that chance to dissipate some of this heat. Again, I am assuming because I've never grown in that environment, but what I'm curious about, especially if you're growing in something like that, is there a way that you get around it? Are there any specific grow lights that you use that maybe don't have that issue? Let us all know down below in the comments. The big other con is maintenance levels. And I know I'm saying this with all of this maintenance that I need to do, but there's extra potential things that you'll go. And again, the people that are for the glass cabinets might say, that's actually one of the pros. So it can swing both ways because you need to do some maintenance with this. As I was talking about, you need to open the windows or the doors of it to kind of to get some circulation going in there. But I'm assuming at some point you also need to take pretty much everything out and wipe down for mold. Because the thing is, if you get a fungal issue within something like a glass cabinet, it's going to spread like wildfire because it has got the perfect conditions. It's humid, it's hot, it's controlled. There's maybe not as much airflow as you possibly could have in there. So yeah, and to be fair, when I was talking about ventilation before, fans can be added in as well, potentially. I don't know, I haven't seen, is there a way that you can get a fan to bring in air from the outside? I don't know. But you can definitely get fans to move the air around within that space, but I don't know if you can bring in air. I don't know. But yes, so it is, the maintenance can be a bit intense as well because if you're watering with tap water, if there's any evaporation that's happening and you maybe live in a hard water area, you're probably going to get limescale build up on the glass on the inside, which means that you might not be able to see your plants as often, and you're going to have to deal with all of these things. And a lot of the times it means that maintenance that I was talking about, it might be that you have to take everything out, treat the whole of the inside, and that can be a bit of a pain, really. Touching in on the maintenance as well goes hand in hand with the pest issue that I was talking about before, because oh, can you imagine, and I know there's going to be people that are going to be twitching in the corner because I don't think they need to imagine it, they've probably lived it. Can you just imagine if you've got some thrips that go into the glass cabinet in a controlled, closed environment? Guess what's going to happen? Everywhere, because thrips, and again, if there's not that much air movement happening in there, we talked about this before, where thrips aren't particularly strong flyers, but they do fly, the adult thrips, that could quite quickly, if you haven't spotted it, spread to your entire collection within your glass cabinet. So yeah. Pro to this though is that maybe at that point you can put predatory insects and deal with everything at one time. Also another pro might be here, because you've all got them together, you treat them all at the same time, and it's likely that the pest issue is controlled within that environment. So bit of pros and cons there, but yes, pest is going to be another thing that you're going to have to keep on top of in terms of maintenance. And the penultimate con, and I'll kind of combine this with two things. One, which is the kind of limitation of space within that, because you're limited, that is the space that you've got in this glass cabinet, in this indoor greenhouse, in this terrarium, in this grow tent. And at the same time, I'm going to merge this with one of the biggest comments that I got on that video that I was talking about earlier on, where people were talking about glass cabinets, and it's interesting because it's something that I would do, but I wouldn't necessarily verbalize it, but I think a lot of you have verbalized this, is that you feel you don't like the idea of it because there's a disconnect between you and your plants. It kind of feels like you're looking at them through a glass cabinet and you're not actually getting to enjoy it. Is it giving people vibes of like your mum's finest china that was in the cabinet that never gets used, but you can look at it from afar so you do not break it? Is it giving that? So there is, a lot of us have talked about this at different times, that sometimes getting plants and getting into the houseplant collecting, it is a bit like Pokemon, where it's like, I got to get them all. That's a different conversation and probably a different video altogether, but it's still a collection. That's why people say sometimes that the hobby is like you're a houseplant collector. I'm sorry to burst people's bubbles, but like ignore the houseplant collection kind of community at the moment and look at any other collection community. So people that might collect, I know there's people that collect teapots or kind of toy planes and all these things. See how they display their collections, and it's kind of giving that vibe. And I think, at least for me, this might not be for everybody, and it might be for some other people as well, it's the reason why I'm more kind of drawn to something like collecting of plants is because I feel more of a connection with nature for being able to kind of interact with my plants a bit more. And I know with the glass cabinets you still can, but it creates that barrier. And I think a lot of people don't like it just purely on that basis, is that they feel that there's then a disconnect between you and your plants, which are kind of living things that you are caring for, essentially. But yeah, the limitation of space, coming back to that, as I said, I'm merging these two together, but the limitation of space is something that's something to be said. And I've kind of recently listened to Jane Perrone. She had her 300th episode, which on the Ledge podcast, I'll link it down below as well. If you're a fan and you've missed all the kind of updates that Jane has been doing, definitely, I highly encourage you to go and have a listen. I think some of it's going to be watchable on YouTube as well. But it was more like a panel with Sarah, the plant rescuer, and T from T's Jungle. And it's like a late night thing. So this might not be appropriate for children. There's a lot of swearing, which is great. But absolutely amazing episode. And they actually were talking about this on the first of the 4-part series, I think, where, and I think that the comment came about for when it comes to like a small Hoya cutting, and it's just like, you've got a small Hoya cutting and you've got all of these and you've got it in the glass cabinet, and then I think it was Jane that was saying, well, it's really funny because when that starts growing, you are not going to have space in that. So there is that notion, and I'm pretty sure when I've spoken to people that do have the glass cabinets, that is a thing that they struggle with a lot, is that at some point, these plants, if they're that happy, they're going to get huge. What are you going to do with them then? Because then if they're too big, and eventually you might need to transition them out of a glass cabinet, that is going to be a rough transition. It's not saying that it's not doable, but it's going to be a transition that's going to like test you and the plants a bit, because you're going from ideal conditions, think vivarium, terrarium situations, and going into possibly household conditions, maybe drafts, like you're losing all of that control, and the plant might have a few issues. Granted, if it's a bit older, it should be able to cope with that, but at the same time, you might have a big plant that then throws a hissy fit and half the plant kind of isn't there anymore. So, things are roundabouts. But yeah, limited space because you've only got that space that the actual greenhouse, grow tent, glass cabinet provides for you. You're limited to that. And I'll wrap up with the final big con, at least in my opinion, I think it would be the initial cost. Like, this is an expensive hobby by and large, and I know, and I am so proud of so many people that do this on a budget, because there are ways that you can do this with very little money or with no money at all, depending on if you're trading and kind of like all of these things. But something like this, if you want to go and do what everybody else is doing, it's expensive. I mean, the glass cabinet, I don't think is that cheap, that cheap. I mean, it's an IKEA cabinet, but it's not that cheap. The grow tents, I know some of them are ridiculously priced. That also for me is a bit of an eyesore. I would imagine a lot of people would maybe have them in spaces that they don't go into very often. The grow tent is even, I would imagine there's an even bigger issue of that distance between you and your plants, because you can't even see your plants at that point. And it's giving vibes of growing other green things, basically. I'm kind of getting the impression that the police might knock on your door at some point and just go, we're seeing heat signatures, there's grow lights in there, there's a grow tent. What are you growing in there? Houseplants, I swear. Just houseplants. But yeah, it is one of those things that these things can be really expensive. That is a lot of an investment, especially if you want to do everything. So you want to customize it, and you want to have fans in there, you want to have grow lights in there, and you want to do all of these things. I mean, there's the glass cabinet, there's the hydrometers, then there's all these other elements that you need to be using in that space potentially if you want to customize it. It just adds up. It's a lot of money, basically. I'm not saying that people aren't okay to spend this money, but it can be a bit of a barrier for people to get into it, a barrier to entry to get into that, because it can be quite costly. And I know you can probably kind of spread the cost a bit more and just get things slowly and as they come in. The other thing, and this isn't necessarily a numbered con, but like the difference between something like an IKEA glass cabinet, a greenhouse, and even the grow tent, by and large, these are not quite terrariums. Same thing in this space here. They're not quite a terrarium because you're not planting everything like they would be in nature. So if you think about a terrarium, especially something like a bioactive terrarium, most of these plants will be grown into some form of substrate. The humidity stays in and it kind of circulates because it will evaporate. It will then create that humidity and it will kind of drop back in. It's the concept of a terrarium. If it's a closed terrarium, that moisture will stay within that space for a long time. But a lot of the times you'll get things like springtails or isopods, woodlouse, all of these things that might be in there, and it's got its own little microclimate. It's like a little slice of a jungle. The glass cabinets, because you're still, by and large, not all the time, you're still having pots of plants. Same with me, I've got pots of plants in here, same with the grow tent. You don't get any of that benefit, if that makes sense. So, and I think I'll wrap it up because I think that's quite a long video already. I do apologise, and obviously I'll put a warning at the beginning of this video. I don't have a glass cabinet, so it's probably just me flapping my arms around and not showing you any plants for this one, but I'll give you a warning at the beginning. But this is more of a discussion piece. What do you think? Tell me your idea, your kind of concepts, because there's good things about IKEA glass cabinets, there's bad things about it. And I'm curious to hear from everybody. I'm not just curious to hear from people that are thinking about getting into it. I want to hear from people that have got glass cabinets, that like them, and people that have maybe not used them anymore, or they don't like them anymore. And same thing for people that goes, they really, really don't like them. And did I maybe kind of give you some pros that you hadn't thought about, and maybe you're going, ooh, maybe now? And people, like, I want to hear from all of you. Let me know, because I think based on how many people are chatting about this, I think there's a need for this forum and for this discussion, because there was a point where everybody and their mother were doing IKEA glass cabinets, and there's updates from it further down the line. Let me know thoughts down below. But yes, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.